Yes, hello, it's October 1st. Do you know what that means? It's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. And today, I want to talk about what might be the most morbid mystery of any lake in the world. Located over 16,000 feet above sea level in the Himalayan mountains, this lake is more of a frozen puddle for most of the year. But as the seasons warm and the ice begins to melt, what's revealed are hundreds of human skeletons, and no one can definitively explain how they got here. To get to Ruband Lake in India, it takes about 8 days of hiking steep mountain terrain for over 30 miles. The bones were officially reported by a forest ranger in 1942, even though there were rumors of the bones before that. He estimates finding between 300 and 800 human skeletons, some with hair and flesh still attached. Because India was embroiled in World War II, it took about 14 years before there was an archaeological survey. Early on, there were a lot of hypotheses, from religious burial site to ill-fated explorer to Tibetan traders on the Silk Road dying from an epidemic. After forensic evidence revealed trauma on some of the skulls from a heavy object, scientists decided this was probably a mass casualty during a hailstorm in the 9th century. In 2010, there was renewed interest after technological advances revealed something extremely strange about the age of these bones. DNA evidence taken from 38 of the hundreds of skeletons discovered here found that the bones dated to vastly different time periods over the course of 1,000 years. It's suspected that there were 2 different events that resulted in mass casualties at this lake in the middle of the mountains. On top of that, there were men, women, and children there. None of them were related, and some of them shared genetics with people from the Mediterranean region. This is particularly strange because we don't have any historical clues as to why people from Crete or Greece were in the Himalayan mountains. Since the weather in the Himalayas can shift dramatically in an instant, and hypothermia leaves no evidence on human bone, it's most likely that the people here froze to death. The lake is also located in a valley between 2 peaks, the type of place a person might seek refuge during a storm without realizing that the coldest air settles into that exact type of valley. So while we know that people probably froze to death, the bigger question now is why were they here in the first place? However, we might never have an answer as tourists continue to desecrate this site, including moving human bones and even taking them home as souvenirs. This tourist even went as far as taking a dip in the frozen skeleton lake. For the secrets trapped in the ice, 9 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. And today, I want to talk about a black sand beach in Iceland that has a proclivity for killing people. Renisfjara Beach is about 115 miles south of Reykjavik on the southern coast of Iceland. This coast lies along the open sea of the North Atlantic Ocean, known for bringing powerful waves to shore. This beach in particular is known for its sneaker waves or rogue waves, which are huge coastal waves that can appear suddenly after a train of much smaller waves. Despite all of the warning signs lining the shore, Renisfjara has still claimed the lives of 5 people since 2017. When an ocean wave grabs you, if it knocks you off your feet, it can be very difficult to get back up again. The wave creates suction that drags you out and washes the sand and gravel from beneath your feet. Once you're in the water, if the currents pull you away from the coast, there's almost nothing that can be done. There's no lifeguards here, and the water is freezing, so hypothermia can set in just a few minutes. Sneaker waves or rogue waves can also appear on other beaches besides Renisfjara. This type of phenomenon happens because the wave can rise rapidly as it reaches the shore. The ocean floor gets deeper rapidly as you move away from the coast. The time between these giant waves can vary, where they suddenly appear back to back before a long period, which can create a false sense of security. In addition, the ocean currents are extremely powerful here and add to that sense of danger. Despite the fact that someone died here as recently as 2022, tourists still flock to Renisfjara because of the towering sea stacks in the background and the basalt columns. All of these features are because of the volcanic activity in Iceland. Even the black sand of these deadly beaches is because of lava coming in contact with cold water. The lava becomes black volcanic rock, which weathers away for millions of years, becoming tiny pebbles and eventually black sand. These geological features will continue to draw tourists in despite the well-documented deadly reputation. Do yourself a favor and stay off the wet sand at Renisfjara Beach. 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about an alien landscape in California that happens to be the home of billions of scuba diving flies. Located south of Lake Tahoe, Mono Lake is one of the strangest lakes on the planet, completely surrounded by the Sierra Nevada mountains. However, there's no outlet for the water, so salt accumulates, making this 3 times saltier than the ocean. The lake is over 760,000 years old, and it used to be humongous and over 900 feet deep. This is also when the iconic tufa towers began to form, a process that could take centuries. The water here is alkaline, so similar to baking soda, and that would have mixed with the calcium-rich spring that percolated from the lake bed. A chemical reaction occurs over an extremely long period of time, creating calcium carbonate or limestone. This was all happening underwater, but eventually, as the lake levels dropped, the tufa towers became exposed. Water might be hostile, but brine shrimp love it, which is why millions of migratory birds stop here every year. For dessert, these birds can feast on alkali flies. These bizarre, hairy flies show up by the billions because there's not much competition here. And did I mention already that these flies can swim? Nicknamed the scuba fly, the hairs on their body create an external bubble, which means they can breathe underwater. Alkali flies spend 3 of their 4 life cycles completely submerged beneath the surface of Mono Lake. In late summer, these flies carpet the edge of the lake, swarming into the air as people approach. On calm days in the summer, you can even watch their silvery, small, teardrop shape amble along the bottom of the lake in shallow water. Billions of flies with a bubblehead charm. 2 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the submerged sections of the Paris catacombs where people go to dive in what I would consider bone soup. In the 13th century, these vast tunnels were actually stone quarries that were repurposed in the 18th century due to Paris's overflowing cemeteries. Today, this intricate network of catacombs spans over 200 miles beneath the City of Lights and holds the remains of over 6 million people. Most visitors only see a small, curated section of this labyrinth, but Parisian explorers known as cataphiles illegally enter these tunnels. Despite the long history of people becoming lost and confused in these pitch-black corridors and even dying beneath the city, cataphiles continue to explore the uncharted sections of the catacombs, including the ones that are submerged in water. The water in these tunnels range from shallow puddles that lap at your ankles to waist-deep excursions in this silty water. However, some explorers take this a step further by actually diving into the portions of the catacombs that are completely submerged beneath water. Some of these illegal tours of this wet underworld have actually helped map out enormous sections of the catacombs that have been underwater for potentially centuries. Would you go swimming in this labyrinth steeped in human bone? 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a cursed lake at the heart of the most nuked place on Earth. Located in modern-day Kazakhstan, the Semipalatinsk test site, also known as the Polygon, is around the size of New Jersey. Between 1949 and 1989, the USSR used this enormous test site to experiment with 456 nuclear bombs. Initially, the Semipalatinsk test site was used to develop and refine nuclear weapons for military application. These tests were done in secret until the West discovered radioactive particles as far as Alaska. However, in 1965, the USSR launched a program called the Nuclear Explosions for the National Economy. The purpose of this was to repurpose nuclear weapons for peaceful objectives. The program was modeled after Project Plowshare, which was the United States version of a similar objective. Both programs were designed to use nuclear detonations to create things like reservoirs or harbors. The Chagan test in 1965 was an underground nuclear test that was designed to create a lake. Alongside the Chagan River, they dug a 584-foot hole and lowered a nuclear weapon to the bottom. The detonation was 10 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima during World War II. The explosion carved a circular crater in the earth that was 1,300 feet wide and 330 feet deep. The dry crater filled in with water from the Chagan River. The minister responsible for the Soviet weapons program actually swam in Lake Chagan to prove that it was safe. However, as you can imagine, it was not safe detonating 456 nuclear bombs, resulting in radioactive dust and debris into the atmosphere, affecting millions of people in Kazakhstan for generations. Lake Chagan's radiation levels remain elevated to this day, and people are discouraged from visiting the Semipalatinsk test site. For a rare example of a radioactive lake created by a nuclear explosion, 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a fountain in Texas that mysteriously killed 4 people in 2004. Located in Fort Worth, the water gardens were created 50 years ago in 1974 by acclaimed architect Philip Johnson. The water gardens actually contains 3 large water features in the downtown area of Fort Worth. However, the main attraction is called the Active Pool. Harkening back to the 1950s brutalist style, this fountain is 40 feet deep and has 19,000 gallons of water flowing through it every minute. Visitors can walk down the 38 narrow steps over flowing water to reach the active pool at the bottom. The architect Philip Johnson has stated that there was an element of danger incorporated into the design of this fountain. However, no one could have known that that element of danger could mean actual death some 30 years later. In June 2004, a family of 3 from Chicago was visiting the water gardens at Fort Worth. Conflicting witnesses to the tragic event are unsure whether the youngest daughter of the family jumped or slipped and fell into the active pool. Either way, immediately after she fell in, another young girl unrelated to the family jumped in after her to save her. At this point, 2 young girls are swirling around in this fountain's vortex, and the first girl's father and brother jump in to help. None of them could have known that the pool was deadlier than usual on this particular day because of a convergence of events that resulted in a monster lurking beneath the surface. Memos dating back to 1974 warned that it would have been practically impossible for someone to escape without assistance should they fall in. But no one could have suspected that a slip and fall would result in drowning because the recommended level of the pool was only 3 feet. Later reports would reveal that the water level on that particular day was closer to 9 feet because of debris and litter blocking the pool's drain. The fountain would have always had a degree of suction to keep water pumping through the system. However, on that day, combined with the high water, this pool had become a swirling, sucking vortex that would have been incredibly hard to escape. The first police officer on the scene, who immediately took off his belt and shoes and jumped in the water, said that the suction was enough to literally pull the socks off of his feet. 4 people drowned that day because of a tragic convergence of circumstances that resulted in an innocent water feature becoming a deadly whirlpool. The fountain was closed until 2007, while the city modified it by reducing its depth to only 2 feet. Today, beneath the unrelenting Texas sun, the water flows on despite this shadow of death. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a lake that has lightning storms going on for 9 hours a night almost every night of the year, and it's probably been happening for 500 years. Lake Maracaibo is the largest body of water in South America, but it's more of a bay since it's connected to the Gulf of Venezuela and therefore the Caribbean Sea. It's almost completely surrounded by the Andes Mountains, and at 36 million years old, it might have been the oldest lake in the world, except for the fact that it's not a lake. Lake Maracaibo is considered the lightning capital of the world because of some 300 nocturnal thunderstorms that happen here every year. Indigenous people of the region called this lightning the River of Fire. During the peak season, there are some 28 lightning strikes here per minute, with storms that can rage for over 10 hours. The lightning here is visible from over 250 miles away, which is why it's been used as a lighthouse of sorts for sailors in the Caribbean for centuries. There's a legend that Sir Francis Drake of England tried to invade the city of Maracaibo by boat in the shadow of darkness, but his plan was disrupted by the lightning's flashes, revealing his location to the city defenders. Until 2015, this spectacular light show was a complete mystery. Researchers at the University of Zulia in Venezuela unraveled the secret. The lightning is concentrated at the mouth of the Catacombs River, which empties into Lake Maracaibo. This bowl-shaped valley traps a lot of heat from the general temperatures near the equator, plus the warm tropical air from the Caribbean. In the evenings, this warm air rises, colliding with the colder air coming down from the surrounding mountains. Storm clouds form with a static charge that builds up, eventually resulting in this insane lightning storm. This natural phenomenon has been happening for at least 500 years, but knowing the age of this fake lake, it's probably more. So, for the oldest lightning storm on Earth, 4 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a diving disaster that happened in the deepest known cenote in Mexico. Cenote is essentially a sinkhole, and Mexico is pockmarked with them. The Zacatón Cenote, which is over 1,000 feet deep, is on the northeastern side of the Gulf. In 1994, Shek Exley, a legendary cave diver, set out to achieve a depth record at this location. He was a pioneer of extreme scuba diving, and he was known for having a resistance to nitrogen narcosis, which usually plagues divers who go too deep. However, Shep had just experienced a life or death situation at Bushman's Hole in South Africa, where 2 other divers died, which is why he announced that this would be his last attempt at breaking a diving record. However, this was uncharted territory, and it took over a year to plan the complicated dive. The descent would only take 10 to 12 minutes, dropping 100 feet per minute. The plan was to just touch the bottom of the cenote and immediately begin ascending. And that's because the decompression time to return to the surface was going to take 10 hours. They prepared 30 tanks of different types of air along the weighted guideline for each decompression stop. Exley's friend Jim Bowden, another experienced scuba diver, was going to make the descent along with him. On top of everything else, they were expected to be switching between different gas mixtures during this fast descent, so both men were strapped with 200 pounds of air tanks. On the day of the dive, Exley and Bowden were on 2 separate weighted guidelines. Because the dive down was incredibly fast, it meant that both men experienced problems fairly quickly. At 750 feet, Bowden began to experience tremors, and at 879 feet, Exley appeared to get behind on his gas management because he was also experiencing some negative symptoms. At 900 feet, Bowden realized he was consuming gas faster than originally planned, and he began to ascend back to the surface. During his ascent, Bowden realized that Exley's line appeared to be slack when it should have been taut, and there was no lights or bubbles coming from below. Not knowing what happened to his friend in complete darkness, Bowden still had to make 9 hours of decompression stops before he could reach the surface. Days after the disaster, when they returned to retrieve Exley's body, they realized that he had become entangled in his guideline. However, this appeared to be intentional, and that in his last moments, knowing he was going to die, Exley purposely got tangled in the rope so that no one else would risk their lives to retrieve his body. What exactly happened to Exley will never fully be known. It's a secret held in the depths of the deepest known cenote. 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the strange aqueduct systems on the island of Madeira. Here, they're not called aqueducts, but instead levadas, which comes from the Portuguese verb to carry. Madeira's vast levada network spans almost 2,000 miles on an island that's only 34 miles long. However, it's the largest island of a 4-island archipelago on a volcanic hotspot that's still active to this day and contributes to the strange topography. Madeira is technically the first island colonized by Europeans when the Portuguese arrived in 1419. However, because of the volcanic nature and mountainous terrain, the island was hard to master. Flat portions along the shore were set up for farming, but they were incredibly dry, while all of the mountains got the moisture, which is where the levadas come in. The first of these irrigation channels was built over 600 years ago, and due to the difficult nature of this terrain, usually it was slaves and convicts who were constructing them. Many were cut into mountainsides at high elevations, which means there's about 25 miles of tunnels that accompany these channels. Paths were built alongside these levadas, which is why Madeira is a popular hiking destination today. Some are easy hikes that have been well maintained for the some million people who visit Medina each year, while others are overgrown and downright dangerous, such as these levadas accompanied by a crumbling path where the ledge might be as thick as a man's boot. On top of that, these levada paths are prone to rock slides and flash flooding during the wet season, which is how so many people, specifically tourists, have lost their lives here, sometimes falling from heights of over 1,000 feet. For the dark history behind these achievements in water infrastructure and the deadly alluring role they play today, 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a tidal wave that could affect London if a shipwreck in the Thames estuary were ever to explode. And this isn't an unrealistic scenario because currently there's 15,000 unexploded World War II bombs on the SS Richard Montgomery shipwreck off the coast of England. Before it sank, the SS Richard Montgomery was an American military cargo ship traveling between Philadelphia and London. She was caught in a storm in 1944 where she drifted into the Thames estuary and wrecked on a sandbank. Today, she's 50 feet below the surface and still packed with the last delivery of ammunition and explosives. Initially, salvage crews worked day and night to remove the explosives from the shipwreck, but the UK government refused to pay them for the risk they were taking, so all salvaging stopped. If just one bomb on this ship were to explode, it could set off a chain reaction that could result in the largest non-nuclear blast in history. According to a BBC report from 1970, if the wreck were to explode, it could result in debris being blown almost 10,000 feet in the air, and it could generate a 16-foot tall wave that would barrel up the Thames River towards London. They've slowly dismantled the masts over the last 80 years. Today, they barely poke out of the water and they're surrounded by warning buoys. However, some 5,000 vessels pass this wreck each year, and between 1944 and 1976, some 28 ships reported a near-miss collision. Despite all of the risks, surveys say that the likelihood of an explosion here is low to moderate. However, because the masts have become a tourist attraction, risking human error around an already volatile site, and on top of that, they're putting strain on the structure of the vessel, they've decided to remove them. So evidence of the wreck might vanish from the surface, but currently there's no good plan to remove the explosives from within it. 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about 3 strange interconnected stories related to the Chicago River, starting with the worst disaster in Chicago history and ending with a mysterious submarine containing skeletal remains. The SS Eastland was a passenger ship based in Chicago that abruptly rolled on her side in the Chicago River in 1915. There was 2,592 passengers on board, and the ship barely made it 20 feet from the dock. Less than half the vessel was submerged, but hundreds of people were trapped underwater in the tight compartments of the ship. Heroic divers entered the dark, murky bowels of the wreck, hoping to discover survivors but usually recovering corpses. One such diver was named William Frenchy Deneau, and months later, on a frigid November day, he was laying cable at the bottom of the Chicago River. He reported finding a mysterious 40-foot-long vessel in the silty bottom of the Chicago River. Inside the rusty hull, they discovered the skeletal remains of a man and his dog. Deneau immediately assumed it was the daredevil named Peter Nielsen. This was a fair assumption because the Chicago daredevil Nielsen had built multiple submarines to tackle the Niagara Rapids and the Niagara Whirlpool, which he did do successfully. It was one of 3 contraptions that he called the Fool Killer, but the third one was an enormous leather bubble that he tried to ride across Lake Michigan at the end of November, which, as you can imagine, did not go very well, and he was found in a deflated bubble on a Michigan shore a few days later. Mistaken identity means that Nielsen was not the corpse discovered in the Chicago River submarine, even though Nielsen's nickname stuck and this submarine is still called the Fool Killer. To this day, no one knows who the skeletal remains belong to or how a submarine ended up at the bottom of a Chicago River. 3 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the ice crevasse and one of the most dangerous places in the world. Glaciers are immense, slow-moving rivers of ice. A crevasse is a deep crack in the ice that's caused by the sheer stress of 2 semi-rigid sections of ice moving at different speeds. Often, powdered snow covers the surface of the glacier, while the crevasse contains solid ice. This is due to the immense pressure from the weight of the snow above over a long period of time. Some crevasses are hidden traps, concealed by snow bridges that can collapse without warning. For climbers, falling into one can mean being swallowed by a glacier and possibly never being seen again. One of the deadliest places on Earth, littered with some of the deepest crevasses ever measured, is the Khumbu Glacier near Mount Everest. The Khumbu Icefall, which is ominously known as the Ballroom of Death, is the most chaotic part of the entire glacier. Climbers have to overcome the icefall after reaching Everest Base Camp, and the route changes every year. And that's because the glacier moves 3 to 4 feet every day. And it takes about 4 years for the ice entering this icefall to emerge at the base. Before the hiking season begins, a group of Nepali Sherpas called ice doctors have to map a path on the Khumbu Icefall. This is considered to be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. They're expected to map out a route on an ever-changing landscape for the hundreds of climbers that visit Everest each year. Just this year, the Everest hiking season started late because the ice doctors mapped out 2 separate paths on the icefall that resulted in a dead end. Hikers navigate a labyrinth of ladders over crisscrossing crevasses that can be up to 150 feet deep. They're also at the mercy of towering blocks of ice called seracs, which can be as large as a house and can collapse without warning. Some 47 people have died at the Khumbu Icefall since 1953. The deadliest incident was in 2014 when 16 Nepalese climbers died from an avalanche in the icefall. And it's arguably become even more dangerous with climate change wreaking havoc on the ice, making it more unstable and unpredictable with each passing year. The Ballroom of Death is a fitting name for this perilous dance with the ice. 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about this seemingly bottomless hole in France with medieval legends and a deadly history. Fosse Dionne is a karst spring located in the Burgundy region of France. This small village of Tonnerre, which is surrounded by rolling hills and vineyards today, may have been settled as early as the Bronze Age. And it could be they settled here because of this natural karst spring. The first written record of Fosse Dionne comes from a monk who settled here in 645 CE. Legend says the monk pulled a basilisk out of the spring, making it possible for people to drink from it. The circular stone rim surrounded by an amphitheater was built in the 1700s as a public washhouse. On average, a torrential 82 gallons of water gushes from this well every second. Countless explorers have ventured into the labyrinth of caves beneath the surface to try and find the origin of the spring. The first actual attempt to dive the Fosse Dionne was in 1908, followed by an autonomous diving suit in 1955. However, the first tragedy occurred in 1962 when 2 divers lost their lives attempting to map out the Fosse Dionne. In 1989, a diver explored over 1,200 feet of maze-like passages, dropping almost 300 feet beneath the earth. However, diving was banned after 1996 when a third diver lost his life, apparently disappearing into the Fosse Dionne, never to be seen again. Before the exploration was banned, divers uncovered ancient vases, animal bones, and even a helmet from the First World War. It wasn't until 2019 that the city allowed divers to yet again explore the depths of the Fosse Dionne. Their footage of the divers squeezing through incredibly tight passages shows how these caverns have been deadly in the past. Even though they made it over 1,200 feet into these tunnels, they were unable to find the source of the spring, which means the seemingly bottomless Fosse Dionne still has secrets to unveil. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the largest acidic lake in the world and its unfortunate history of killing people. Kawah Ijen is located in the belly of an active volcano on the island of Java in Indonesia. The lake is enormous, almost 600 feet deep, and it resides in the caldera of the volcano, which is around 12 miles across. The water here is like battery acid, and combined with its high heat, it could dissolve any animal or human that fell into it. The cause of this acidic soup are these noxious sulfuric gases that are percolating up from the volcano below. Gases are also superheated over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit as they emerge from cracks in the volcano. The billowing, noxious clouds that can be found here are a consequence of sulfur reacting with oxygen and water, creating sulfuric acid. Breathing these gases is like literally breathing droplets of sulfuric acid. Your eyes will burn, your throat will burn, and your skin will tingle where it's burning. Kawah Ijen is known for these blue flames, a rare occurrence on Earth that is caused by the combustion of sulfur. The blue color occurs because the temperature of burning sulfur is extremely high, up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Sulfuric gases ignite upon exposure to oxygen. However, sulfur is also a commodity, so there are over 200 miners at Kawah Ijen that installed these ceramic pipes which convert these sulfuric gases to a liquid sulfur. The sulfur cools and condenses, turning from a dark red out of the tube to this fluorescent yellow that the sulfur miners collect. After mining the sulfur with little protective equipment against the sulfuric gases, these miners have to hike up almost a mile out of the caldera. Carrying up to 200 pounds of sulfur, miners have to hike up this steep trail for over 2 hours. Typical daily earnings from this incredibly dangerous job equate around $12 a day. Kawah Ijen has also claimed lives, such as in 1976 when carbon dioxide bubbles emerged from the bottom of the lake. These enormous bubbles were some 30 feet in diameter, and they appeared suddenly on the southern part of the lake near the sulfur miners. The flood of carbon dioxide gas suffocated 11 sulfur miners. Every year there's accidents with tourists and even the occasional death. As recently as April of this year, a tourist died while trying to pose on the rim of the volcano, and she ended up falling over 300 feet. For this noxious and acidic sulfuric environment that glows blue at night, 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a growing crater in Siberia that locals call the gateway to the underworld. This yawning hole in the earth is located in the far reaches of Russia. From space, it resembles a horseshoe crab, and it's enormous. Around half a mile across and over 300 feet deep, the Batagaika Crater is growing more and more each year. This really began in the 20th century when Russia was hungry for natural resources. The potential for diamonds, gold, silver, coal, oil, and gas resulted in the Soviets sending Gulag prisoners to this permafrost country. Many of these prisoners died while extracting these treasures from the earth, and their bodies basically replaced them. In 1937, a Moscow geologist discovered tin ore near the current city of Baikal. By the 1960s, the forest on this land was completely gone, including the roots that were holding the earth in place. And this is where the gash began, eating away at the frozen earth. Permafrost is ground that remains frozen despite the changing seasons in places close to the Arctic. This region of Siberia can have a permafrost over 5,000 feet deep. Batagaika is a thermokarst depression where the permafrost has collapsed. It's the largest thermokarst depression in the world, and it's nearly tripled in size since it first appeared. From inside the crater, you can see these towering walls of frozen mud that are slowly thawing, retreating about 40 feet every year. The land is being swallowed while the earth also belches out remnants from the past. In 2018, they discovered a 42,000-year-old foal from a horse species that was extinct in the Batagaika Crater. Despite being entombed in the ice, this foal still had liquid blood in its veins. Scientists are able to glimpse a 650,000-year history through this thawing gash in the earth. That also means discovering bacteria and viruses from long ago. But that's not the only thing frozen in the ice, because the Batagaika Crater also releases 4,000 to 5,000 tons of carbon every year. Methane, carbon dioxide, and other greenhouse gases are released as the permafrost thaws, which accelerates climate change. This in turn causes more permafrost to thaw, creating a dangerous feedback loop. However, the crater itself is reaching the limits of its expansion. The ground has almost completely eroded to the bedrock, marking the end of the permafrost. But as they say, death is only the beginning. 9 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello. I want to show you one more thing about the Siberian permafrost. So Batagaika Crater is a thermokarst depression. It's kind of on a hill, so the topography of this location means that as it's melting, all of that water is just draining away into nearby rivers. If it wasn't on a hill, it would probably have become a lake. And what I want to show you is on this peninsula nearby, also in Siberia. This peninsula is completely pockmarked with thermokarst lakes, and recently they photographed them up close. And this is what they look like. They're kind of formed in the same way as the Batagaika Crater, where they're a result of the permafrost melting. Some of them are over 100 feet deep, which is completely wild to me, and I think a human would be super tiny standing next to these, so it's kind of hard to appreciate the scale. They're not only in Siberia, you can also find these thermokarst lakes in places like Canada, anywhere where there's a permafrost. And honestly, they're all pretty spooky looking. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a nightmare that unfolded in a labyrinth of caves almost 6 miles underground in 1967. The Mosdale Caverns are an intricate cave network located in Yorkshire, England. Alongside this crumbling limestone cliff is a bubbling stream called the Mosdale Beck. It mysteriously disappears beneath the cliff in one of 2 caverns that's completely unexplored and reappears 5 miles away some 18 days later. The second cavern was partially mapped out by avid spelunkers in the early 1960s. But in June of 1967, a group of 6 young men decided to push into the unexplored areas of this cave system. They were all experienced cavers who had explored this cavern before, but it was still notoriously challenging. The passages are known for being incredibly tight and claustrophobic. These caves have low ceilings, twisting passages, tight squeezes, and water that pools in the depressions. One particularly tight section is called the Marathon Crawl, where cavers have to pull themselves along on their bellies for more than 900 feet. After hours of squeezing through these incredibly tight tunnels, the men had made their way to the bottom of this cave system. Despite entering the caves on a cloudy day, none of them suspected that a storm was brewing. Over the course of just 3 hours, a torrential rainstorm had dropped more than an inch of water and the Mosdale Beck was flooding. What was once a bubbling stream was now a raging river that had engulfed the cave entrance and flooded the passages. Even though they were 6 miles underground, they could probably hear the rushing sound of water echoing off the cavern walls. Eventually, the passages were probably flooding as the men were trying to escape back to the surface. No matter how fast they crawled, the water would have continued to pour into this labyrinth of tunnels. By the time a rescue team arrived, the underground labyrinth was completely flooded. In hopes that the young men had found refuge in air pockets, hundreds of volunteers arrived to pump water out of the caverns. It was hours before the rescue team was safely able to enter these drained passages. However, the team only encountered death at the bottom of the tunnels. 5 bodies were discovered on that first day, and the 6th was discovered 24 hours later. The coroner decided that the bodies should remain in the caverns, and a gate was placed over the entrance. However, in 1971, friends of the victims decided to re-enter the cave system and move their friends' corpses to a higher level. This final resting place was renamed the Sanctuary, and the families were informed. Despite the fact that this is officially a tomb, people still explore these caverns to this day. 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today we have to talk about the Pit of Sludge. This enormous helping of fluorescent orange soup goes by no other name except Toxic Lake. Located in the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, there was actually no lake here until 1978. Instead, there was a picturesque village in a lush valley. The town of Gemina was home to 400 families, some of whom could trace their heritage back by millennia. But in the 1950s, they discovered a rich copper reserve in the surrounding mountains. The Roșia Poieni copper mine extracts some 11,000 tons of copper here each year. As you can imagine, this type of process is incredibly toxic. To extract the copper ore, they have to add heated chemicals such as sulfuric acid and other solvents to the rock to dissolve it. The leftover slurry of rock particles and chemicals is known as tailings, and they need to put it somewhere. The mining company, with permission from the Romanian government, decided to pump the tailings into the nearby valley. This is how the alpine community of Gemina found themselves being evacuated in 1978. They had to leave everything behind, from their homes to their loved ones who died long ago. Their graves were subsumed by the sludge over the following decades. Cradled between mountain peaks, this thick toxic slurry virtually erased all memory of the village that once existed here. Up until very recently, the church at the heart of Gemina was visible above this viscous goop, but today you can only see the steeple. Houses that were once high up on the mountain are now vulnerable to this growing wasteland. A strange side effect to the chemical makeup and viscosity of this lake of tailings is the vibrant colors that emerge from the mixture. Visitors to this wasteland today report intense smells wafting from the lake's surface. And each year it grows and spreads, swallowing more land in this pungent muck while also poisoning the groundwater. For this metastasizing toxic tumor that calls itself a lake, 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the treacherous underbelly of one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Nusa Penida is a tiny island located next to the island of Bali. It's one of 17,000 islands that make up the nation of Indonesia. However, it has a reputation of both being a hot tourist destination and being cursed. In 2023, 5 tourists died in the span of a single month, all because of the treacherous water here. One such location is Broken Beach, which is famous for this rock arch. But standing near that arch when the ocean is having a bad day is a recipe for disaster. However, the most infamous location, and the one that's claimed the most lives, is Angel's Billabong, an infinity pool with a close proximity to the open ocean. Despite many warning signs, visitors underestimate the unpredictability of sudden waves. Enormous surges catch swimmers off guard, slamming them against the rocks and swallowing them in a vortex. During low tide, the pool can be tranquil and serene. However, when the waves start coming in, tourists often get caught in the undertow. I guess I can understand why people unwittingly trust this natural lagoon. One moment it's completely clear and there hasn't been a wave for hours, and the next moment there's a sneaker wave that takes everyone out. And most of the time there's a second wave that follows the first. To make it worse, this billabong is located on the edge of a cliff, so if you get sucked out by a wave, there will be hundreds of feet between you and the bottom of the ocean. However, if you think you're safe standing on the edge high above the lagoon, think again. Waves can ricochet off the rocks and into unsuspecting bystanders. The waves are so powerful, they can drag your entire body off the cliff and into the ocean. In this clip, you can see a man almost get swept out to sea at the Angel's Billabong, but luckily someone notices him and he catches himself on the rock. It might be a coincidence, but the local people of Bali believe that Nusa Penida is home to malevolent spirits. The island has a reputation of being cursed, but it's also known for being a place of great spiritual power. So respect the local lore and beware the sneaker wave. 4 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Here's the problem. I always want to talk about Lake Baikal, and since this is an official Lake Baikal stan account, I think it deserves its own Spooky Lake episode. In case you're new here, Lake Baikal is the oldest, deepest, and strangest lake on the planet that I would argue is inherently spooky all by itself, but I'll throw in a bit of morbid history. Lake Baikal was formed in a rift valley starting some 28 million years ago, which is how it's so incredibly deep. In fact, it's still tearing apart to this day. They experience some 2,000 earthquakes here every year, and in the distant future, it could be an ocean. Its phenomenal depth is almost uncanny, over 5,000 feet into the earth, which means it's almost a mile deep. And there's something incredibly strange at the bottom. There are few lakes that are deep enough to have hydrothermal vents at the bottom. Cold water seeps into cracks in the lake bed before being heated up by magma in the crust and pumped back out laden with minerals. There is an incredible amount of dissolved oxygen that's circulated through the lake, which is the foundation for the strange ecosystem. In total darkness, potentially thousands of feet beneath the surface, 80% of this complex ecosystem can only be found here at Lake Baikal. This does include the mysterious Nerpa seal, the only exclusively freshwater seal in the world. Which, by the way, scientists don't really know how they got here, and this is what their teeth look like. To answer your question, yes, we have been to the bottom of the lake, and I'll just leave you with this creepy image of Putin in a tiny submarine. But I think one of the more unnerving aspects of Lake Baikal is its unique ice, which covers the lake for the majority of the year, and it can be over 6 feet thick. The ice is also part of the lake's morbid history. Russia experienced a deadly civil war in 1917 after heavy losses in World War I. Over 10 million people died in a 3-year period. Near the end of the war, some 30,000 soldiers retreated across Siberia after losing the upper hand. This brutal journey included their families, all of their possessions, and millions of dollars of the Tsar's gold. They were also being chased by opposition across the continent, and in a moment of desperation, they chose to cross the frozen surface of Lake Baikal. With Arctic winds unobstructed across the lake's surface, many of the soldiers and their families froze to death. Their corpses remained like a morbid tableau on the surface of the lake. It wasn't until the spring that their frozen bodies and all of their possessions disappeared into Lake Baikal. And no one really knows where the gold went. I'm definitely biased and I ran out of time, so 9 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the deadly history of saturation diving in the North Sea. Tucked between 8 different countries, this incredibly shallow sea has a reputation for being treacherous. And in the 1960s, they discovered oil here. A race began specifically between Norway and Great Britain to uncover pockets of black gold at the bottom of the North Sea. Deep-sea divers were the aquatic equivalent to prospectors and a necessity to constructing these enormous oil rigs. However, there was little to no oversight for these early saturation divers, and 79 men lost their lives in gruesome ways between 1966 and 2016. To understand how some of these deaths happened, you have to understand the extreme measures of deep-sea diving. Divers live in a literal pressurized tube that's around 20 feet long and 7 feet wide for 28 days. These tiny pressurized habitats are designed to maintain the same deep sea pressure as the environment where these men work. These habitats are usually aboard a ship, but they have an attached and pressurized diving bell. The diving bell is then lowered into the ocean up to 1,000 feet, where divers will work for up to 8 hours. When they leave the diving bell, they're attached to it by something called an umbilical cord, which provides heat, communication, and air. They emerge into an inky black landscape lit by their headlamps and the diving bell itself. They're surrounded by freezing temperatures that could kill them, crushing pressure that could kill them, and unpredictable currents which could kill them. Not to mention that anything could be in the water with them, and their cumbersome suits make it difficult to see around them. All of these extreme measures are designed to prevent decompression sickness. This occurs when nitrogen gas, absorbed under high pressure, forms dangerous bubbles in the body if a diver ascends too quickly to the surface. To avoid sickness or death, divers have to spend up to 8 days decompressing in a controlled environment, which means it takes longer to decompress a saturation diver than it takes an astronaut to get to the moon. If someone gets sick or dies, they still have to wait the 8 days to depressurize, which is how men have ended up waiting alongside a corpse for the nitrogen bubbles to leave their body. And there have been many corpses in this profession. In January of 1974, disaster struck the Drill Master rig during a routine dive in the North Sea. A diving bell was located at a depth of 320 feet with 2 divers. Suddenly, the diving bell's drop weight was accidentally released, resulting in the diving bell shooting back to the surface. This horrible mistake resulted in both the divers being dragged by their umbilical cords with the diving bell to the surface. This violent decompression would have resulted in bubbles immediately forming in the bloodstream and soft tissues. The bubbles would have entered the heart, lungs, and brain, expanding and resulting in almost immediate death. This accident is one of hundreds that happened in the early days of this profession, which is why saturation diving is one of the most terrifying jobs on Earth. 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello. I forgot to mention the one thing that makes saturation diving maybe not so spooky. Because the saturation divers have to live in a pressurized environment for 28 days, the air in this environment is not the air that we breathe normally. Instead, it's a mixture of helium and oxygen called heliox, which has a lower density than air. Heliox can increase the blood oxygen saturation, which means these divers can stay underwater for longer. However, there's one side effect that makes this kind of hilarious, despite how scary saturation diving is.
Hello everybody, happy Christmas from in the garden Christmas Eve at the moment, and we've just come back from diving, and we're going to go away again in the morning, so I thought I'd send you a little message now to say have a lovely day, and I'll miss you all.
Oh yeah, in this deadly, serious, terrifying job, they almost always have helium voices. But I don't know if that actually takes down the spookies. I do feel like I only scraped the surface of deep sea diving, and there was a lot of other accidents that are worth covering. What do you think? Should I just do a part 2? Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and apparently we're not done with deep sea diving. Today, I want to continue to talk about the early days of commercial saturation diving in the North Sea and the gruesome deaths that occurred here. Imagine working 300 feet beneath the surface of the ocean in a place where sunlight never reaches and it's almost below freezing. You have to breathe a mixture of gases that not only make it difficult to talk, but also drain your body of heat, giving you a constant chill. At the end of your 8-hour workday at the bottom of the ocean, you return to the confines of the pressurized diving bell that returns you to your ship on the surface. Here, the diving bell is connected to a 20-foot pressurized tube that you share with 3 other men. You eat a meal delivered through a tiny hatch, catch a few hours of sleep, and then eventually return to the diving bell and the abyss. Saturation divers live like this in a pressurized environment for over a month at a time. It can take 8 days or more to decompress this habitat before the divers can re-enter the real world. There are many aspects of this incredibly dangerous job that can kill you, but that pressurized environment they live in might be the worst. The Bifur Dolphin was an offshore oil rig built in 1974, located in the Norwegian waters of the North Sea. In 1983, there were 4 saturation divers at the rig living and working in this pressurized environment. Aboard the ship, the divers are supported by 2 operators who monitor and manage the operations from outside their living capsule. On November 5th, 2 of the divers were returning from the ocean floor in the diving bell. The bell is designed to attach to the living capsule where the other 2 divers are residing. The returning divers crawl through this tube connection and secure the living quarters door behind them. After this, the operators should be able to detach the diving bell and depressurize it. However, before the returning diver was able to properly close the door, the clamp securing the diving bell and the living quarters was released prematurely. In an instant, the living capsule would have violently decompressed. This would have caused the diving bell to explode backwards, killing one of the operators. All 4 divers inside the living capsule were instantly killed from this rapid decompression. However, it was the diver closest to the partially open door that experienced one of the most brutal deaths imaginable. Because the pressure difference was so extreme, the diver's body was instantly pulled through this narrow opening. Official reports the cause of this accident was boiled down to human error, even though the equipment failed. It took 25 years for the families of the divers to sue the Norwegian government and get compensation for their wrongful deaths. Safety measures and accident rates have significantly improved since 1983. However, 79 saturation divers had to die in the North Sea before these changes could happen. And deep sea diving is still one of the most dangerous and terrifying professions. 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the real dangers of aerated water, specifically at wastewater treatment plants. Alongside these vats of frothing sludge, there's danger signs that warn of non-buoyant conditions. These warnings are also repeated across the internet, that if you fall in one of these aerated tanks, you'll sink to the bottom like a stone. And people have died in these bubbling pools, but if you were to fall in, the aeration might be the least of your problems. Humans are buoyant in freshwater and even more so in saltwater. However, if you introduce air into the water, it does become less dense and therefore less supportive. However, the bubbles in an aerated tank come straight up from the bottom, creating a force that can counteract the lack of buoyancy. A paper published in 1985 determined that the reduction in buoyancy of an aeration tank is around 2%. In 2021, a man in Switzerland jumped into an aerated tank of drinking water where he was still able to float even though he said it was more difficult. But none of this makes these aerated tanks at the wastewater facility less dangerous. Arguably the backbone to modern society, wastewater treatment facilities turn our waste into usable, clean freshwater. Aeration tanks are a later stage in the treatment process and contain no solid waste. However, this water is basically alive because they add bacteria to break down the organic materials, including fecal matter. The bubbles in these tanks are for the bacteria to provide them with dissolved oxygen. If you were to stop agitating the water, a material called sludge, rich in bacteria and organic matter, would fall to the bottom. However, this organic waste is creating gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide, which means if the conditions were right, you could suffocate from the lack of oxygen and breathing in these dangerous gases. Not to mention, falling into one of these tanks could result in getting water in your mouth, eyes, or nose, which would introduce dangerous bacteria, pathogens, and viruses into your body. However, what might be the most dangerous part of these frothing pools are the currents created by the bubblers themselves. Combined with the less buoyant water, these churning currents could easily drag someone beneath the surface, quickly overwhelming their ability to stay afloat. And oftentimes the walls of these pools are incredibly high and someone disoriented wouldn't be able to escape. In a worst-case scenario, nobody even sees you fall in, which means you're alone in a 15-foot deep, frothing pool of sludge. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about one of the best preserved shipwrecks in the world and the museum that it's housed in, which is the spookiest I've ever visited. In 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa set sail from Stockholm for the first time and sank about 20 minutes later. Built on the orders of the Swedish king for the 30 Years' War, the Vasa was one of the most powerfully armed ships in the world, with 64 bronze cannons and towering twin gun decks. However, she was dangerously top-heavy, and a single gust of wind resulted in her capsizing almost instantly. There were over 100 crew members on board as the ship disappeared beneath the surface less than 400 feet from the shore, where scores of onlookers were watching. 333 years later, the Vasa was raised from the dead in 1961. It was only around 100 feet below the surface in the Stockholm harbor. The wood was preserved in this specific location by the cold, polluted, brackish waters of the Baltic Sea. This environment is free of shipworms, which usually destroy wrecks in warmer, saltier seas. The Vasa was an archaeological time capsule, including 30 skeletons discovered on board, many of whom are in the Vasa Museum today. This includes a human brain, which has no cell structure or DNA left, so it's basically soap in the shape of a brain. The ship was installed in a museum at the heart of Stockholm, opening in 1990. The Vasa Museum is a hauntingly interesting place dedicated entirely to telling the story of a single ship, from its grandiose demise to the ongoing science preventing its decay. The ship was in surprisingly good condition for being at the bottom of the sea for more than 300 years, but the hull would have quickly deteriorated if it had simply been left to dry. To prevent shrinking and cracking of the waterlogged wood, they sprayed it for 17 years with polyethylene glycol. After that, it took 9 years for the Vasa to dry, evaporating over 550 tons of water. Once the ship was exposed to the air, chemical reactions in the timber began to produce acidic compounds. It's estimated that there's some 5,000 pounds of sulfuric acid in the Vasa's hull, and more is continuously being created. Even the bolts in the ship are causing problems. The original ones rusted away, but now the new ones that were added are also rusting, leaching iron into the wood. To deal with this acidic deterioration, which is inevitable, the museum is kept between 64 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit with a humidity level around 53%. There are plans to replace the rotting bolts, to build a new cradle for the ship, and implement further preservation techniques to slow this ongoing decay. There's something strange about knowing that this resurrected shipwreck is slowly dissolving before your eyes in the dim lighting of this museum surrounded by skeletons. 4 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology, and today I want to talk about flooded subway systems and their eerie dystopian presence in our modern world. Increasingly intense bursts of rain in increasingly brief periods of time has resulted in subway systems from around the world becoming the receptacles of floodwater. New York City has famously experienced flooded subways that grind the city to a halt. Flash floods turn stations into pools and tunnels into water-filled traps. Most notably, Hurricane Ida brought record-breaking rainfall in 2021, overwhelming the outdated subway infrastructure. But this is also happening globally, where drainage systems were created for much smaller flows of water. Some cities are making improvements to their outdated infrastructure, like Tokyo, where floods have impacted their intricate subway network. They constructed a $2 billion underground drainage system that include 5 enormous silos and a holding tank the size of a football field. It's hard to appreciate just how enormous this is, but it can hold millions of gallons of water, all designed to divert floodwaters. However, some cities have built new metro systems, but they're still overwhelmed by an unexpected torrential downpour. The Chinese city of Zhengzhou experienced the heaviest rainfall ever recorded in the country. City officials were slow to shut down Zhengzhou despite repeated warnings from meteorologists about the severity of this storm. Nearly 8 inches of water in a single hour turned the city streets into rivers. All of that water flowed into the subway tunnels beneath the city. People sought refuge in the subway stations to escape the deluge, and Line 5 was one of the last trains operating. There were 500 people on board, and they only made it 2 stops before the floodwater started to creep under the doors. The water rose extremely quickly in this claustrophobic environment. Soon, it was even higher than passenger shoulders and still rising. Survivors recall treading water near the peak of the flooding, keeping their head close to the ceiling while gasping for air. It took around 4 hours for the floodwaters to recede, finally allowing rescue teams to enter the tunnels. All but 14 made it out of the subway alive. This tragedy exposed the vulnerabilities of our urban infrastructure in the face of climate change. As extreme weather events become more frequent, we'll see more subway systems experience the same fate. These transitory tunnels, now filled with rushing murky water, echo the sound of the bustling city above. 7 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the history of the abandoned radioactive lighthouses in Siberia. Most of you have probably heard of the Northwest Passage, where men have died and disappeared in the ice to establish a route above Canada. However, in the mid-20th century, Soviets were also looking to create an international trade route through the Arctic above Siberia. This passage, which ran from the western Arctic to the Bering Sea, was crucial during World War II, but it was also one of the most challenging routes in the world. Thousands of miles of frigid, desolate coastline with harsh weather and constant ice made navigation perilous. To light this icy route, Soviets installed thousands of makeshift lighthouses along the Siberian coast. Many were in remote, deserted areas with no lighthouse keepers to maintain the light. Soviet engineers came up with an unconventional solution: radioisotope thermoelectric generators, or RTGs. These small nuclear-powered units use strontium-90 to produce heat, which was then converted to electricity. RTGs aren't inherently bad. They're used by NASA to power missions into deep space. They were perfect for remote Arctic lighthouses, but strontium-90 is a highly radioactive isotope. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, these nuclear-powered lighthouses were left abandoned. Records were forgotten and precise locations were lost in time. The RTGs were left to rot in the Arctic wilderness, some with little to no protection against the elements, thousands of them scattered across Russia as orphaned radioactive devices. People in these remote areas seeking scrap metal would unwittingly expose themselves to radioactive materials. This device was found cracked open with the radioactive core some 30 feet away, but no one ever found out who handled it. Because handling this core for even a second can result in severe radiation exposure, which can lead to burns, cellular damage, and even death. Which is exactly what happened in 2001 in Georgia, which used to be part of the USSR. 3 men came across a hot cylinder in the woods and decided to use it to keep them warm throughout the night. Unfortunately, they didn't realize it was an abandoned radioactive RTG core. 2 men suffered severe radiation burns and 1 died months after the event. The process of removing the core safely was actually recorded, and it's fascinating because they couldn't use a robot. Instead, they had to move the core slowly, each of them being exposed at 40-second intervals. After this tragedy, Russia did work to find and dismantle the active RTGs scattered across the country, including the lighthouses on the Siberian coast. However, hundreds of these radioactive units remain unaccounted for across Russia. Their radioactive presence is visible through these decaying sentinels that watch over the icy Arctic route. 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about a bubbling creek in Australia that's claimed 21 lives since 1959, and it's not because of crocodiles. This treacherous stretch of stream is located in Queensland, south of the city of Cairns. Called the Babinda Boulders, this spot takes its name from the Aboriginal term Bunabinda, meaning water passing over rocks. They say the area is haunted by the spirit of a young woman whose forbidden love story ended here in death. Whether haunted or cursed, it's true that anyone who enters the frothing sections of this creek are more likely to be removed in a body bag than be rescued. Tourists flock to this area because just downstream is a perfectly safe swimming hole. However, people frequently venture to the rocky sections of the river despite multiple ominous warning signs on the path leading up to it. Certain sections of the river have garnered a morbid nickname, such as the Devil's Pool, the Chute, which is an incredibly narrow section of the river, and the Washing Machine. Some of these features disappear completely under the water during the wet season, but people still venture in despite it being more dangerous. Storms at the headwaters of this river can also result in a flash flood, which happened in 2015 when a woman was swept away under the rocks and drowned. The Chute is a particularly terrifying section where this wide river narrows to less than 2 feet across. Beneath the surface, this section might look something like a slot canyon, where water has carved out the rock over millennia. More than half the deaths at Babinda Boulders have happened at the Chute, where they estimate it's around 30 feet deep. If you were to fall in, not only would you be fighting against aerated water that reduced your buoyancy and being pummeled against the rocks by strong currents, but there are pockets beneath the surface that can trap you forever. Sometimes it can take days to recover a body, not only being trapped in those pockets, but also beneath rocks and logs, and even bodies that are swirling in an endless vortex. Authorities once spent 2 weeks searching for a body in the Devil's Pool, and when they eventually found it, it was wedged so tightly beneath a log, they had to remove the leg to retrieve the corpse. In the case of Babinda Boulders, beauty is truly skin deep, and death is just beneath the surface. 6 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about this mysterious lake in Austria that supposedly has millions of dollars of solid gold at the bottom that people have died trying to find. Lake Toplitz is a cold, deep lake located in the Austrian Alps, and during World War II, it was the site of secret naval experiments by the German army. However, in 1945, as Allied forces closed in, witnesses saw German soldiers dropping wooden crates into the lake. The exact number of crates wasn't certain, and nobody knew what they contained. However, estimates suggest that German forces tried to conceal some $19 million of solid gold across Europe as World War II was beginning to end. Rumors were quick to spread that the crates the German soldiers had thrown into Lake Toplitz contained millions of dollars in solid gold. But the lake itself would prove to be treacherous. Frozen for most of the year and plunging over 300 feet deep, the bottom half is filled with salty anoxic waters. That means no dissolved oxygen, which is how thousands of trees have been preserved in a maze-like web at the bottom of the lake. On top of that, recreational divers could only descend to around 130 feet safely. So by 1947, the lake consumed its first explorer, a US Navy diver who became entangled in the spiderweb of underwater trees and drowned. However, in 1959, after a string of other mysterious deaths, divers discovered the wooden crates that the German soldiers had thrown into the lake. To everyone's surprise, the crates contained 700 million in counterfeit British pounds. Apparently, locals had been stumbling across these washed-up British banknotes for years after the war, and local banks were more than a little bit confused when people began to attempt to exchange them. But why were there forged British banknotes at the bottom of Lake Toplitz? The answer lies in Operation Bernhard, a wartime counterfeit scheme designed to destabilize Britain's economy. The Germans forced skilled Jewish prisoners to create counterfeit notes that were basically indistinguishable from the genuine currency. The plan was to take literal airplanes over Britain and drop these notes, undermining the British economy from within. The Germans likely attempted to bury evidence of the operation by sinking these counterfeit notes in Lake Toplitz. This discovery confirmed the scale of Operation Bernhard, one of World War II's most audacious economic plots. While they never discovered any solid gold, the story of Lake Toplitz attracted countless treasure hunters. 4 additional men lost their lives trying to find this rumored gold until Austrian officials banned diving at Lake Toplitz entirely. Whenever men endlessly pursue fabled gold, it seems to end poorly. 5 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about Stillwater, an internet meme run rampant that taps into our fascination with undisturbed waters on this planet. The meme began with an interest in abandoned places filled with water. These stagnant pools have evoked a sense of fear in a chronically online audience. To be fair, these waters aren't necessarily harmless, from bacterial colonies and biofilm to warmer waters that contain the brain-eating amoeba, a parasite you can contract when you completely submerge your head. However, it evolved from unironic urban exploration into a parody of itself. Despite this, I'm genuinely intrigued by these pools of stagnant water, but urban exploration's got nothing on the ultimate Stillwater. Kidd Creek is the largest base metal mine below sea level in Ontario, Canada. In 2016, almost 2 miles beneath the surface, scientists discovered the world's oldest water. Tests revealed that this liquid is at least 2 billion years old. Old water in this sense means water that's never interacted with the Earth's atmosphere in 2 billion years, either by exposure or evaporation. They analyzed the water by studying gases that were trapped inside of it. They can measure the concentration of these gases that are absorbed by the water as it ages in rock fissures, such as helium, argon, and xenon. While they didn't find anything alive in the water, they found chemical traces of single-celled organisms that once lived in it. The water was described as viscous like syrup, and once it came in contact with the surrounding oxygen, it changed from clear to orange. One of the scientists present actually took a sip of this ancient water and described it as saltier than the ocean and extremely bitter. That's why the ultimate Stillwater that was chilling out 2 miles beneath the surface for 2 billion years gets 3 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month, where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about zombie wells in Texas. that result in pools and lakes of salty brine laced with chemicals and spewing toxic gases. Beneath the surface of the dry landscape in West Texas lies the Permian Basin, an ancient seabed that now supplies more than 30% of the oil and gas produced in the United States. And because of that, over 1 million wells have been drilled here over the last century. Texas has around 8,500 oil and gas wells that have been officially abandoned. By abandoned, I mean these wells are no longer maintained and they lack a protective concrete seal that prevents harmful substances from leaking out. But experts estimate that the true number of unplugged, idle, and orphaned wells is closer to 470,000. What seeps out of these orphaned wells isn't limited to oil. If an aquifer was tapped during the drilling, the well can regurgitate a mixture of brine, oil, and toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide and methane. Over time, the metal casings can crack or corrode, sometimes resulting in the well bursting open explosively in a geyser of toxic water. Other times, a well will burp and gurgle a salty brine, eventually resulting in an actual lake. At first glance, Lake Beamer might look like an oasis, but taking a dip here might actually kill you. Water that's 3 times saltier than the ocean and laced with radionuclides gushes at 200 gallons a minute. The lake emits hydrogen sulfide, which at low concentration smells like rotten eggs, but can be lethal in high doses. This cocktail also includes arsenic, heavy metals, and methane, a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide. Studies estimate that these abandoned wells are emitting hundreds of thousands of metric tons of methane annually, contributing to the climate crisis. Even though companies are required to plug a well after it's done producing, many of them don't do it properly. To do it properly, you have to dig a giant hole and fill it with cement, which is really expensive, made even more so if it's spewing water, oil, or gas. Plugging a well can cost anywhere from $20,000 to well over $1 million. It's estimated that it'll cost around $335 million to plug all of the abandoned wells in Texas. But that only accounts for the wells on the official list. There are also likely wells that have been lost to time, hidden and forgotten in the desert, zombies waiting to rise again. 8 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello, I'm not over these zombie wells in Texas. A lot of people ask me why the companies or corporations responsible for drilling these wells are not responsible for properly plugging them up. The worst of the wells are the ones that are corroding, so the ones from the early 1900s up to like the 1990s. They put a cap on it, but they didn't plug it properly, and then they just left it. Over time, companies went out of business, or the well changed hands, and we just lost track of who the owner of the well really is. So the responsibility ends up falling on the people who own the land above, and they have to inform the Railroad Commission, which is really not about railroads, it's about oil and gas wells. Which, by the way, I had no idea, but in Texas, somebody can own the land above, and somebody completely different can own the land below. So somebody who purchases land today, like a huge crop of land, could have like 15 or 20 of these derelict wells on their property, and it's kind of their responsibility to let the Railroad Commission know when it pops. Last year alone, the Railroad Commission plugged around 1,000 wells. But when you compare that to the some 470,000 supposedly abandoned, lost, and orphaned wells in Texas, that's just not enough to compete with how many are degrading and eroding over time. Luckily, Texas did accept around $300 million from the federal government because of the bipartisan infrastructure bill from a couple years ago, which is helping fund at least a little bit with plugging these wells. I also didn't mention in the video that there's some 3 million official abandoned wells in the United States. So this is not just a Texas problem, this is a United States problem. The EPA estimates that these wells emit around the same amount of methane as 2 to 5 million cars. There is some really interesting research into how people can convert these abandoned wells into something that can produce energy. So there is a silver lining if we can just get movement on this. Yes, hello, it's almost the end of Spooky Lake Month where we're doing 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today, I want to talk about the loneliest place in the world, which is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's not often that we think about the back of Earth's head, but this is where Point Nemo is. Discovered in 1992 and also called the Oceanic Pole of Inaccessibility, this pinpoint on the map is 1,600 miles from any shore, lost between South America, Antarctica, and New Zealand. There's no buoy to mark this location, and the ocean floor is more than 15,000 feet below the surface. But maybe strangest of all, nothing can live here. Point Nemo is located within the South Pacific Gyre, which has extremely low biological productivity. The gyre's rotating currents block nutrient-rich waters from entering, so there's very little plankton, which are the foundation of marine life. That makes this one of the most barren regions in the ocean, virtually an ocean desert. There's also no regular marine or air traffic within 250 miles, which means the closest people to Point Nemo are the astronauts on the International Space Station. Due to its isolation from human and marine life, it's the perfect place to destroy spacecrafts. And luckily, I have a space friend.
Surprise hello, it's me. Beneath the surface, Point Nemo is a spacecraft cemetery. Decommissioned satellites and other space relics are directed to crash here, burning through the atmosphere before sinking to the ocean floor. Since the 1970s, space agencies worldwide have used this remote spot to safely dispose of space debris that's been falling back to Earth. Hundreds of spacecraft, including large space station modules and satellites, lie in the depths here, a high-tech graveyard at the bottom of the sea. And while some of these spacecraft burn up in the atmosphere, large chunks of them hit the ocean. Plunged into darkness, these relics of exploration drift in eerie silence, a reminder of the fact that even the farthest reaches of our planet aren't untouched by human activity. And in around 6 years, our beloved International Space Station will join the debris in this black abyss.
I think Alexandra would agree that a burial site for human ingenuity, thousands of feet beneath the surface in an ocean void, deserves 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello. Today's the last day of Spooky Lake Month, where we did 31 days of haunted hydrology. And my Halloween tradition is to remind you why Lake Superior is terrifying. It's estimated that some 10,000 people have died in Lake Superior, and there's some 350 shipwrecks that we know of. But there's one specific area that has more shipwrecks than the rest of the lake combined, and it's considered to be the graveyard of the Great Lakes. Whitefish Point has more than 240 shipwrecks in and around Whitefish Bay. This is one of the most highly trafficked areas of Lake Superior, where ships have to navigate through narrow shipping lanes in close quarters with other ships. It's one of the first areas on the lake subjected to ice, and it can often be bombarded by lake effect snow. Superior is also known for the November storms, also called witches, where the temperature difference between the air and the water can create winds up to 70 miles per hour and waves up to 35 feet. Unlike the ocean, these waves are incredibly close together because they're only created by wind, and they can continuously batter ships passing through in a storm, which is probably a contributing factor to the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the most famous resident of Whitefish Point. However, the real reason it sank during that November gale just 17 miles from shore will probably always be a mystery. All 29 crew members went down with the ship in 1975, and today this shipwreck is considered their grave. Because Lake Superior is incredibly cold and incredibly deep, she rarely gives up her dead. An exception would be in 1919, when a steamer ran into a November gale near the Whitefish Point Lighthouse. The ship sank in this terrible storm, taking the 22 crew members with her. The following March, the Coast Guard was running mail with a dog sled team when they discovered a body in the ice on the shore. His body was frozen into the ice, and the only way to remove him was to chop him out with an axe, which they did, unfortunately removing 2 of his fingers in the process. The fingers were never recovered, and he was carried as a block of ice on a dog sled to be buried in the station cemetery. Less than a year later, the SS Superior City, loaded with iron ore, was crossing the Whitefish Point Lighthouse in heavy fog. Out of nowhere, it was T-boned by a 580-foot steel steamer named the Willis L. King. The crew was attempting to lower the lifeboats when cold water rushed into the boiler, resulting in a massive explosion. 28 men were immediately killed by the blast, and now they reside at the bottom of Whitefish Bay. In 1988, there was controversy because divers handled the bones of these deceased crew members, including a leg bone with a foot and shoe still attached. After 30 years of divers visiting these sites, handling remains, and removing artifacts, the Whitefish Point Underwater Preserve was established in 1987. Today, this area is protected, and sites like the Edmund Fitzgerald are considered a graveyard. As if I needed another reason to give Lake Superior 10 out of 10 spookies. Yes, hello. It's unfortunately no longer Spooky Lake Month. But every year I do a recap of the 31 days of haunted hydrology. This year will always stand out to me because the book I wrote and illustrated about spooky lakes was on the New York Times bestseller list for the entire month of October, and that's because of you guys. Thank you to everyone who purchased it. I really wanted to do a few videos about the behind the scenes of making Spooky Lake, so maybe I'll do that in November. If you didn't know, last year I did make a Spooky Lakes rubric because I know some of you don't agree with my ratings. To be fair, even my sister called me this year and was like, Gio, what the heck? Why did the SS Montgomery get a 10 out of 10? And I was like, are you kidding me? That's the spookiest thing ever. A tsunami hitting London because of a shipwreck that could explode at any time. But it just goes to show that my spooky ratings aren't necessarily going to align with everybody else. Now, to be fair, I've made 155 Spooky Lake videos in the month of October, not including the ones that I've done outside of October. That's 5 seasons worth of Spooky Lakes, and there are certain things that I'm just completely freaked out by and other things that don't bother me at all. But I'm dying to know what your favorite Spooky Lake topics were from this year. I collect these topics over the course of the year, and I have this enormous list of like 300 topics, which is combined of your recommendations and my general internet sleuthing. And so one of my favorite topics from this year was a recommendation that completely came out of left field. I had never seen anyone recommend it before, which was the Fosse Dionne. My 2 favorite videos to make, like the ones that I just had a great experience filming and writing the script and collecting all the images, was the deep sea diving video, the first one, and then the radioactive lighthouses. I think I had hit my stride by then. I kind of was like a little rusty at the beginning of the month. The video that also entertained me the most, the one that I thought was just hilarious and fun, was the Aerated Water video. I was like, man, an opportunity to educate about wastewater treatment plants. Thank you for everybody who also supported our small business, because I get to combine my love of spooky lakes and art, and it's just so satisfying. My mom actually packs all of these orders, and we do send all of the stickers via snail mail. So if you haven't gotten your order yet, please email me and reach out. We also have t-shirts available, but they're only available till November 5th. Including the prints and stickers that we sold, we did end up raising around $7,000 for Hurricane Helene relief, so congratulations for being part of that. I also am bad at posting about this, but I was excited about all of the different articles and interviews and podcasts that I got to be on. So thank you to everybody. Scientific American, my old student emailed me for this one, and then of course Nat Geo, Have I Made It in the World? My kitty Minnie stopped by to say thank you. Say thank you. Thank you for a wonderful Spooky Lake Month. I'll see you guys again, well, sooner than next year, but for Spooky Lake Month, I'll see you next year. Yes, hello. It's no longer Spooky Lake Month. I'll see you next year.